What would you do if an entire town needed one winter tradition, but the ice beneath it could no longer be trusted? Coast Guard veteran Wesley Marlowe refused to approve the crossing, even as neighbors blamed him for destroying the season they depended on. Then 6 adults walked onto the frozen bay anyway, carrying a brass lantern meant for a woman who had been gone for years. When the ice began to break, Wesley discovered another danger. He could not hear the emergency alarm calling him to help. With his German shepherd Bracken beside the rescue team, Wesley had to admit his limits, trust others, and bring every stranded person back alive. What followed was not a victory over the lake, but a town learning that grief, tradition, and home can survive in a different form. Tell us where you're watching from, share your thoughts below, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers and keep these stories coming. The morning arrived clear enough to make the world look simple. Snow covered the rooftops of Whitewater Bay in clean, white layers, and the frozen surface of Lake Superior stretched toward the horizon like polished stone. The sunlight was pale and cold, reflecting off the ice with a brightness that made people squint even behind dark glasses. From the harbor, the town was already waking up. Wooden stalls were being assembled along the waterfront. Strings of lanterns hung between posts and railings. Shop owners carried boxes through the snow. Visitors had begun arriving days earlier, filling inns and guest houses in anticipation of Lantern Crossing, the winter tradition that had become the heart of Whitewater Bay. From a distance, it looked festive. From where Wesley Marlowe stood, it looked fragile. He adjusted the collar of his navy weatherproof jacket and looked across the frozen bay. At 50, Wesley still moved with the steady efficiency of someone accustomed to working outdoors in difficult conditions. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself without wasted motion. Wind pushed through his brown and silver hair, disturbing the careful part that never stayed in place for long. Beside him, Bracken pressed his nose into the snow. The German shepherd moved slowly across the survey area, sniffing at nothing obvious, ears rotating toward sounds too distant for most people to notice. One ear stood upright while the other leaned slightly to the side, giving him an expression that often looked thoughtful. "Easy," Wesley said. Bracken glanced up briefly, then returned to investigating the ice. A few yards away, Leah Vaughn knelt beside a radar unit mounted on a sled. Unlike Wesley, Leah seemed completely unaffected by the cold. Her dark hair was tucked beneath a green knit cap, and she worked with the calm concentration of someone who trusted numbers more than opinions. "Surface thickness is still holding," she called. Wesley walked over. "How much?" 23 inches here." "That's the good news." Leah gave him a sideways look. "You always have a second sentence." "Usually." The radar screen displayed uneven patterns beneath the surface. Most of the route appeared stable. Most of it. That was the problem. Wesley studied the image. The lake looked solid from above. It looked trustworthy. The screen suggested otherwise. Several irregular voids appeared beneath one section of ice, not large enough to trigger immediate panic, but large enough to raise questions. Questions were dangerous. Questions were what got people hurt when communities wanted certainty. Leah leaned back. "It could be localized." "It could." "We need more data." "We do." Neither of them sounded convinced. Bracken suddenly stopped moving. Wesley noticed it before anyone else. The dog wasn't barking. He wasn't growling. He simply froze. His posture lowered slightly. His eyes remained fixed on a stretch of snow-covered ice several yards away. Wesley followed his gaze. Nothing seemed unusual. Still, he walked toward the area and planted another survey marker. "Let's scan this section again." Leah looked up. "You saw something?" "No." She waited. Bracken did. A faint smile crossed her face. "Your scientific method continues to evolve." "Bracken doesn't get a vote." "No," Leah said, "but somehow he always gets a second scan." Wesley couldn't argue with that. 30 minutes later, the new readings confirmed subtle structural inconsistencies beneath the surface. Not proof, not certainty, just enough to make him uncomfortable. And Wesley had learned long ago that discomfort deserved attention. By late morning, the survey team returned to town. Whitewater Bay looked even more alive than it had at sunrise. Outside the harbor cafe, people laughed while carrying boxes of decorations. Across the street, workers tested lighting systems for the waterfront displays. Everything depended on the lake behaving exactly the way people hoped it would. Wesley knew better. The council meeting took place inside the municipal building shortly after noon. Mayor Miriam Holt sat at the center of the table, reviewing schedules and permit documents. Her silver hair framed a face that had spent decades balancing budgets, politics, and impossible decisions. Around her sat business owners, organizers, and department leaders. Leah presented preliminary findings. The room listened carefully at first, then impatiently, then quietly. The silence after uncertainty always felt different from ordinary silence. Miriam folded her hands. "Can the route be adjusted north?" Leah glanced toward Wesley. "Possibly." "Possibly isn't an answer." "No," Wesley said, "it isn't." Miriam exhaled slowly. The room felt warmer than the frozen lake outside, yet Wesley suddenly felt tired. Not physically, emotionally. He recognized the atmosphere. People wanted reassurance. Experts wanted caution. Neither side was wrong. That was what made situations like this so difficult. After the meeting, Owen Kessler caught up with him outside. Owen towered over most people. Years spent building boats had left his shoulders broad and his hands permanently rough. His gray hair had nearly taken over entirely now, but there was still strength in the way he carried himself. "Walk with me." It wasn't really a request. The two men moved through the town center while Bracken trotted beside them. Store windows displayed lanterns of every color. Restaurants prepared for weekend crowds. An inn owner shoveled snow from her entrance while greeting arriving guests. Owen gestured around them. "You see all this?" "I do." "Do you?" Wesley remained silent. "These people have been planning for months." "I know." "You always know." The answer came harder than Owen intended. They continued walking. At last, Owen stopped near the harbor. "The route has been safe for years, and lakes don't care about history." The words landed heavily. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Owen looked toward the frozen bay. "Ever since Aaron died, you've been waiting for another disaster." Wesley felt something tighten inside him. The name still carried weight. 10 years later, still. "I don't wait for disasters." "No?" "No." "You prepare for them so hard you forget some days are allowed to be good." Wesley looked away. The conversation had moved beyond ice. Neither man knew how to return. Later that afternoon, Wesley stopped by the community warming station to inspect emergency equipment. The building smelled faintly of coffee, old wood, and winter clothing drying near heaters. That was where he first noticed the music. A low cello note drifted through the room. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. Claire Danner stood near a chair beside an open instrument case. She wore a dark burgundy sweater beneath a charcoal coat, her blonde hair loosely tied back. She drew the bow across the strings again. The note vibrated through the wooden floor. Bracken immediately lay down, relaxed, comfortable. Wesley watched for a moment. Claire noticed. "Your dog approves." "He doesn't approve of much." "That makes this an honor." A faint smile appeared before disappearing again. The music continued. Another note, then another. Wesley couldn't hear every detail. Some higher tones seemed distant, blurred. Yet the deeper notes traveled through the floorboards beneath his boots. Claire seemed to notice something in his expression but didn't comment. Instead, she rested one hand lightly on the cello. "Funny thing about sound," she said quietly. "What?" "Sometimes people think hearing only happens through the ears." The statement lingered longer than it should have. Before Wesley could respond, Bracken rose and walked to the instrument case. He sat beside it calmly. For some reason, the sight stayed with Wesley. The dog trusted very few things immediately. Apparently, music was one of them. By evening, snow began falling again, lightly at first, then steadily. Wesley returned to the lake one final time before dark. The town glowed behind him. Lanterns illuminated the waterfront. Warm yellow light reflected against the snow. People moved through the streets carrying decorations and supplies. From a distance, Whitewater Bay looked exactly the way postcards wanted it to look. Perfect. Wesley knelt near one of the survey markers. The wind had shifted. Snow covered portions of the surface that had been clear only hours earlier. He removed a magnifier from his pocket and examined the ice. There, a faint line, thin enough to miss, subtle enough to ignore. A narrow fracture stretched beneath fresh snow, not dramatic, not dangerous by itself, but real, very real. Wesley stared at it for several moments. Behind him, the lanterns continued glowing. Ahead of him, the frozen lake remained silent. For the first time all day, he felt completely alone between those two worlds. One wanted celebration, the other demanded patience. And somewhere beneath the ice, hidden from everyone else, something was changing. Snow continued falling through the night, softening the edges of Whitewater Bay. By morning, the town looked brighter than it had the day before. Fresh snow covered tire tracks, footprints, and every small imperfection people usually ignored. The uncertainty beneath the ice remained invisible. Wesley Marlowe spent most of the morning reviewing survey data at the operations office. Maps covered one wall. Temperature readings, radar scans, and current flow reports filled his desk. None of them gave him the answer he wanted. Only probabilities. Only risks. Outside, the town was moving in the opposite direction. Preparations for Lantern Crossing had accelerated. The closer the festival came, the harder it became for people to imagine it not happening. Near noon, Wesley joined a planning session with Leah Vaughn and Captain Rena Cole. Rena carried herself differently from everyone else in the room. Years of emergency response work had given her a directness that left little room for drama. Her dark hair, streaked lightly with gray, was pulled back tightly, and she listened with the focused attention of someone trained to separate facts from emotions. Leah projected updated maps onto a screen. "We found 2 alternate approaches," she said. "Any better?" Rena asked. "A little." Wesley studied the highlighted routes. Neither crossed the unstable section identified the previous day. Neither eliminated uncertainty. "What's the confidence level?" he asked. Leah hesitated. "Not high enough for me to feel comfortable." The room fell quiet. Rena folded her arms. "Comfortable isn't the same thing as unsafe." "No," Wesley replied, "but it's usually where unsafe starts." The discussion continued for nearly 2 hours. Shorter routes, smaller groups, additional rescue stations, temporary barriers, every possible adjustment was examined. Every solution created a new problem. By the time the meeting ended, nobody had reached a conclusion. The festival remained suspended between possibility and cancellation. Outside, people continued hanging lanterns, as if the decision had already been made. That afternoon, Wesley walked through town with Bracken. Unlike the previous day, he wasn't inspecting anything. He was trying to think. The dog moved beside him quietly, occasionally stopping to investigate piles of snow or greet familiar shop owners. Most people greeted Bracken before greeting Wesley. Wesley had never minded. Near the waterfront, a local craftsman was repairing damaged lantern frames. A few yards away, volunteers painted directional signs. Everyone seemed busy protecting something. Not the ice, not the festival. The feeling attached to it. For the first time, Wesley wondered whether that was what he had failed to understand. At the far end of the harbor stood Owen Kessler's boat-building workshop. The large doors were open despite the cold. The smell of cedar and machine oil drifted into the street. Wesley almost kept walking. Instead, he stopped. Inside, Owen was sanding a wooden hull. Neither man spoke immediately. The sound of sandpaper filled the silence. Finally, Owen set the tool aside. "You here to argue?" "No." "Good." Another pause. Bracken wandered through the workshop and eventually settled near an old workbench. His attention fixed on a brass lantern resting there. Unlike the decorative lanterns filling the town, this one was simple, handmade, worn smooth by years of handling. Wesley looked at it. "The original?" Owen nodded. "My wife made it." The answer carried no bitterness, only exhaustion. For several moments neither man spoke. Then Owen surprised him. "I know the ice isn't the same." Wesley looked up. Owen rested one hand on the lantern. "I know what Leah found." "Then why are you fighting so hard?" The older man smiled faintly. "Because this town needs something." Wesley expected an argument. Instead, he received honesty. "My wife died 8 years ago," Owen said quietly. "Some people need churches. Some need cemeteries. Some need traditions." His eyes remained on the lantern. "This is mine." The words stayed with Wesley long after he left the workshop, not because they changed his mind, because they complicated it. Back at the warming station later that evening, Claire Danner was helping prepare supplies for festival visitors. She wasn't performing music today. Instead, she carried boxes and organized medical equipment with the efficiency of someone accustomed to solving practical problems. When she noticed Wesley standing nearby, she smiled. "You look like someone trying to carry a question that's too heavy." "Do I?" "You do." Bracken approached her before Wesley could say anything. Without hesitation, the dog rested his head briefly against her arm. Claire seemed surprised. "So that's progress." "Apparently." "Should I feel honored?" "Probably." The answer came easier than Wesley expected. For the first time, the conversation didn't feel like an interview. Claire handed him a roll of tape. "Help." "What am I helping with?" "You're standing here. That's close enough." For the next 20 minutes, they worked side by side, assembling supply kits. No discussion about ice. No discussion about risk. No discussion about Aaron, just ordinary work. The simplicity felt unfamiliar. When they finished, Claire leaned against a table. "You know," she said, "sometimes people think responsibility means carrying everything alone." Wesley recognized the trap. "Is this professional advice?" "No." "Good." "It's personal advice." He laughed, despite himself. The sound surprised both of them. Outside, snow continued drifting through the streetlights. Inside, Bracken remained asleep beside Claire's chair. For reasons Wesley couldn't explain, that bothered him less than it should have. Later that night, after returning home, Wesley opened a drawer he rarely touched. Inside sat a hearing test referral form from nearly 6 months earlier. He stared at it. The paper had remained there untouched through winter storms, inspections, and meetings. A simple piece of paper, nothing dramatic, nothing urgent, yet somehow harder to confront than unstable ice. After a long moment, he folded it and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Not because he had made a decision, not yet, but because leaving it in the drawer suddenly felt like its own kind of choice. Outside the window, lantern lights flickered across the snowy harbor. For the first time in weeks, Wesley wasn't thinking about what might break. He was thinking about what people were trying to protect, and he wasn't entirely sure which concern frightened him more. The next morning, Claire found Wesley standing at the back of the old harbor church while the musicians prepared for rehearsal. He had come to inspect the building's emergency exits. At least, that was what he told himself. Bracken had already settled beside Claire's cello case. His uneven ears relaxed as the first low notes moved through the wooden floor. When the other instruments joined, the room changed. Violins carried above the cello. A flute entered softly, and several voices rose from the front pews. Wesley shifted closer to the doorway. From there, he could see everyone's faces. Claire noticed. She finished the passage, lowered her bow, and asked the others to take a short break. "You don't like crowds?" she asked. "I don't like blocked exits." "That isn't what I asked." Wesley looked toward Bracken. The dog remained calm despite the movement around him. Claire placed Wesley's hand against the curved wooden side of the cello. Before he could pull away, she drew the bow across a low string. The vibration entered his palm first, then traveled into his wrist. He could hear the note, but not with the same clarity Claire seemed to hear it. The higher sounds from the rehearsal had blurred together. This one had weight. "Music doesn't disappear because it reaches you differently," she said. Wesley removed his hand. "I have an appointment this afternoon." Claire did not ask what kind. Her restraint made the admission feel more real. Dr. Nathan Baird worked from a small examination room above the county clinic. He was tall and narrow-framed, with silvering hair, titanium glasses, and the patient humor of a man accustomed to people pretending they had no problem. After the tests, Nathan turned the monitor toward Wesley. "You have moderate loss in several higher frequencies. Conversation in a quiet room is still manageable. Radio static, alarms, overlapping voices. Those are where the gaps become dangerous." "Can I still do my job?" "With the right equipment and an honest team, probably." "Probably?" Nathan leaned back. "You came here for accuracy, not comfort." Wesley almost smiled. Nathan recommended hearing aids, visual alarm systems, and changes to field communication. None of it sounded impossible. That made Wesley's next question harder. "How long before I have to report it?" Nathan's expression lost its humor. "You should have reported the symptoms when they began affecting work." Wesley folded the results and placed them inside his jacket. He told himself he needed time to understand them. What he really needed was time before anyone else understood them. That evening, the final safety meeting filled the municipal hall. Leah displayed updated hydrology data showing that the weakened areas did not form one predictable line. The warm current beneath the bay shifted with wind and pressure, thinning the ice unevenly from below. Rena reviewed the rescue plan. "If one section fails, we can respond," she said. "If multiple sections fail under a moving crowd, we cannot guarantee access or withdrawal." Miriam proposed one last compromise. A small group, a shortened route, no generators, no heavy equipment. For a moment, Wesley considered it. Then a freight truck passed outside. The floor trembled faintly beneath the meeting table. Bracken rose at once. He did not bark. He simply widened his stance and looked toward the windows. Wesley watched the water ripple inside a glass near Leah's laptop. Hundreds of synchronized footsteps, equipment sleds, repeated vibration over hidden voids. "Did the model include dynamic loading?" he asked. Leah looked at the screen, then at him. "Not at that duration." "Can it?" "Not before the event." The compromise collapsed without anyone saying so. Rena closed her folder. "I won't sign the rescue plan." Leah removed her approval sheet from the stack. "I can't certify the route." Every face turned toward Wesley. He thought of Owen's brass lantern, the inns, restaurants, and families depending on the weekend. He also thought of the fractured line hidden beneath fresh snow. "I won't sign it either." Miriam remained silent for several seconds before announcing that Lantern Crossing was suspended. Outside, the town still glowed with decorations, but the news moved faster than the evening snow. Conversations stopped when Wesley passed. People who had known him for years found reasons to study windows, phones, and unfinished work. Across the square, Owen stood beneath a string of lanterns. Neither man crossed the distance between them. Before dawn the next morning, Owen unlocked his workshop. The brass lantern waited on the bench. It was his wedding anniversary. He had no intention of walking to Black Pine Island. Only to the old marker near shore, where he and Helen had once stopped together. Harold Briggs arrived first, thin and gray-mustached beneath an old green parka. Walter and Linda Pierce followed, then Samuel Reed and Victor Hale. They had heard Owen meant to go alone and refused to let him. "This isn't a protest," Owen told them. No one answered. Fresh snow had covered several route markers during the night. When Owen stepped onto the bay, the brass lantern hung steady from his gloved hand. Behind him, 5 sets of footprints followed into the white. Wesley spent the morning after Lantern Crossing was suspended, clearing his desk. He removed old route maps, packed field notebooks into a canvas bag, and began a transfer request he had not yet decided where to send. The operations office was quiet, except for the heater clicking beneath the window. Bracken watched from beside the door. Wesley had made the correct decision about the ice. He knew that. Yet certainty offered little comfort when shopkeepers avoided him and neighbors lowered their voices as he passed. Perhaps Owen had been right about one thing. Perhaps Wesley had spent so long preparing for disaster that he no longer knew how to remain anywhere after preventing one. Claire found him folding his spare survey jacket into a box. "You're leaving." "I'm organizing." "You alphabetized the emergency manuals." "They needed it." Claire looked at the half-written transfer request. Bracken rose and crossed the room, but instead of going to Wesley, he stood beside Claire. "You do this every time something costs you," she said. "You decide the cost means you no longer belong." This isn't a rehabilitation session.
No. In a rehabilitation session, you would have to answer.
Wesley closed the box harder than necessary. Before he could respond, Bracken turned sharply toward the communications cabinet. The dog's body stiffened. He scratched once at the metal door, then again. Wesley heard nothing. Claire pointed toward the wall panel. A small red indicator was flashing, but the larger visual alarm remained dark. Wesley opened the cabinet. A high-frequency warning tone was sounding through a damaged speaker, thin, sharp, and almost absent to him. His phone was vibrating in the next room. The message on the screen erased every other thought. 6 adults reported on bay. Possible ice failure. Owen Kessler among them. Wesley called Rena immediately. "I missed the first alarm," he said before she could speak. "High-frequency loss. Confirmed yesterday."
The visual circuit failed. A pause followed.
Rena's voice returned colder than the weather.
"You knew?" "Yes. We'll deal with that later. Come to the harbor. You are not taking communications command."
Understood. By the time Wesley arrived, the rescue staging area was already forming. Captain Rena Cole stood over a portable map table in a red rescue jacket and white helmet, assigning teams with clipped precision. Leah monitored current data from a weatherproof tablet. A county ice unit unloaded ropes, inflatable sleds, and anchor drills. Marisol Vega directed the medical zone near 2 waiting ambulances. Her dark curls were tied back beneath a navy cap, and her voice carried the calm authority of someone who had no patience for panic. 2 hypothermia bays ready," she called. "Nobody brings me a wet patient without warning." Rena pointed Wesley toward the map. "Tell me what the ice is doing."
Nothing else. The accident was scattered across 3 damaged areas rather than one dramatic collapse. Walter Pierce had fallen through to one leg before Victor Hale pulled him free. Walter's shoulder was injured during the effort. Linda Pierce was stranded on a section separated by 2 widening cracks. Owen and Harold Briggs remained farther east, unable to cross back. Samuel Reed was missing from sight. Through binoculars, Wesley saw the abandoned brass lantern lying on its side. Its small flame had gone out. Fresh snow had hidden the older route markers, and the group had drifted nearly 200 yards south while trying to avoid the closure barrier. "They're over the hollow section," Wesley said. Leah checked the coordinates. "Not all of them. The current shifted overnight." "Then we approach from northwest and test every 10 feet. Rena studied him. "You advise. I decide." "Yes." Bracken strained once against his leash as a distant figure tried to stand. Wesley placed a hand on the dog's collar. "Not yet." The German Shepherd was not an active rescue dog anymore. Noise, unstable surfaces, and metal equipment could trigger him. Wesley would not send him onto the ice simply because desperation made every ability look useful. Rena divided the responders into 3 anchored teams. One would reach Linda, another would move toward Owen and Harold, the third would search the snow ridges for Samuel. A rescuer named Ben Ortega clipped a secondary line to Bracken's orange vest. Broad and steady, Ben had handled dogs during previous shoreline searches. "He stays at staging unless I authorize otherwise," Rena said. Then Linda began moving. Even from shore they could see her panic. She pushed herself upright on ice that flexed beneath her. "Linda!" Owen shouted from across the cracks. She turned toward his voice and nearly lost her footing. Rena watched through binoculars. She needs something closer to focus on. Her eyes moved to Bracken. Wesley understood the question before she asked it. "Long line," he said. "Tested path only. Ben controls him." Rena nodded once. "Do it." As the first team stepped onto the bay, Wesley remained beside the map instead of following.
Every instinct told him to move closer, take control, and make himself indispensable. Instead, he listened to Rena's orders, watched Leah's data, and allowed other people to carry the work. For the first time in years, protecting someone required him to stay where he had been placed.
The first rescue team moved northwest in a slow line, testing the ice ahead with poles and drilling every 10 feet. Ropes ran from their harnesses back to anchors near shore. Wesley watched from the command table, forcing himself not to step forward. Leah marked each safe point on her tablet. Rena controlled the teams by radio. Ben Ortega guided Bracken along the tested route, keeping the German shepherd several yards behind the lead rescuer. Linda Pierce was still trapped between two widening cracks. "Stay low," Rena called through the loudspeaker. "Do not stand." Linda looked toward shore but seemed unable to understand. Her breathing was visible even at a distance, fast and shallow. Ben stopped Bracken within the approved boundary. The dog lowered himself onto the ice. "Linda," Wesley called. "Look at Bracken." Her head turned. "Keep your eyes on him, nothing else." Bracken remained still, amber eyes fixed on her. Linda's hand stopped clawing at the snow. "Move one knee," Wesley said, then the other. She began crawling. The rescue team reached her with an inflatable sled and pulled her across the narrowest crack. Bracken did not move until Ben gave the command to return. As Linda passed him, she touched 2 fingers to the side of his vest. The gesture lasted less than a second. It changed the entire rhythm of the rescue. Farther east, Owen and Harold remained cut off by a fractured channel. Walter had been secured, though his shoulder was badly displaced. Victor stayed beside him, pressing a gloved hand against his back to keep him calm. Samuel Reed was still missing. Rena sent the 3rd team toward the snow ridges south of the marked route. Wesley joined the advance group only after Rena approved it. His task was narrow. Read surface patterns, identify pressure lines, and advise on direction. When they reached Owen, the ice gave a low sound beneath them. Wesley heard nothing. Owen did. "Left side," he said sharply. Wesley studied the snow. A thin gray line was spreading beneath the crust. "Back 3 feet," Wesley ordered. "Weight to the right." The rescuers shifted. The line opened where they had been standing moments earlier. Owen stared at Wesley. "You didn't hear that?" "No." For once, Wesley did not pretend otherwise. They moved in silence until Owen's injured shoulder made him stumble. Wesley caught him. "Samuel went south," Owen said. "He thought the ridge would block the wind." "You let him go alone?" "He was 10 yards away. Then the snow lifted." The answer was not a defense. It was regret. The search team found Samuel partly buried behind a drift, conscious but confused. His gloves were wet, and his speech had slowed. Marisol's voice came through the radio. "Keep him horizontal. Insulate underneath. No sudden movement." Bracken was brought forward on the tested route while the stretcher team prepared. Samuel's eyes fluttered open when the dog approached. "Stay with him," Wesley told Bracken. The dog lay beside Samuel's shoulder, close enough to be seen, but not interfere with treatment. When the stretcher was ready, Wesley called Bracken. The dog did not move. Wesley called again. Bracken pressed closer to Samuel, whose eyes had begun closing. Rena looked toward Wesley. "We need you at the crossing point." Wesley hesitated. For 5 years, Bracken had followed him through every room, every storm, every night when sleep became impossible. Leaving him now felt wrong in a way Wesley could not explain. Ben clipped his line beside the dog. "I've got him." Wesley looked at Bracken once more, then turned away. The final transfers took another 40 minutes. No one died. Walter and Samuel were transported to the hospital. Linda was treated for cold exposure. Owen refused medical attention until Marisol threatened to have him restrained. Reporters gathered beyond the barriers, but Marisol stepped between them and the ambulances.
"These people are patients, not a winter spectacle," she said. Before Owen was taken away, he found Wesley near the overturned brass lantern. "I wasn't trying to prove you wrong," Owen said. Wesley picked the lantern up. Its glass was cracked. "I know. It was our anniversary. You brought 5 people into your grief." Owen lowered his eyes. "Yes." Wesley did not forgive him. Not there. Not yet. At the hospital, Wesley sat outside the emergency department with the lantern beside his boots. Bracken lay nearby, but for once he did not press against Wesley's leg. Claire arrived without her cello, still wearing her clinic coat beneath a winter jacket. "Can you hear the ambulance?" she asked. Wesley listened. The engine was clear. The higher electronic pulse seemed faint and broken. "Part of it," he said. Claire nodded. Wesley looked down at Bracken. For the first time, admitting what was missing did not feel like losing everything. 3 days after the rescue, Whitewater Bay held a public hearing in the municipal hall. Every chair was taken. Business owners stood along the walls. Rescue volunteers remained near the doors. Reporters filled the back row, though none had been permitted near the hospital after the accident. Wesley sat beside Leah and Rena rather than at the front alone. That difference mattered. Mayor Miriam Holt opened the hearing without ceremony. "The purpose of today is not to decide who deserves praise," she said. "It is to determine what failed, who was responsible, and what must change." The first speakers wanted simple conclusions. Some called Wesley a hero who had saved the town from a larger disaster. Others blamed Owen for every financial loss and demanded criminal charges. Wesley listened until both versions became unbearable. When his name was called, he stood with a folded statement in his hand. He described the weakened ice, the shifting current, and the missing dynamic load data. He explained why the route could not have been certified. Then he put the statement down. "There is something else." Rena turned slightly toward him. Wesley looked at the room rather than at her. "My hearing loss was diagnosed before the accident. I did not report it immediately." The hall changed. Not loudly. A chair creaked. Someone lowered a pen. "I missed the first emergency alarm because I could not hear its frequency, and the visual circuit failed. The condition did not alter the ice data. It did affect the trust my team had the right to place in me." He requested temporary removal from communications duty until his equipment, medical assessment, and field procedures were updated. No one applauded. Wesley was grateful. Rena spoke next. "I do not need perfect people in rescue work," she said. "I need accurate information about the people standing beside me." Her words were not forgiveness. They were a boundary. Leah presented the larger failure. Safety approval had depended on 3 signatures, yet commercial pressure, emergency planning, and technical review had still been forced into the same narrow timeline. "The system encouraged everyone to search for permission," she said, "instead of asking whether the event itself still made sense." Owen entered near the end of the session with his arm secured across his chest. He looked smaller without his workshop apron and tools. He admitted leading the group into the restricted area. He resigned from the Lantern Crossing Committee and agreed to accept whatever financial penalties the county imposed. When angry voices began treating him as the only cause of the accident, Wesley stood again. Owen made a dangerous decision, he said. But this town had already decided the tradition could not be allowed to fail. We placed grief, business, and identity on one route across unstable ice. Owen looked at him. Wesley did not soften the truth. He brought 5 people into his pain.
The rest of us helped build a town where he believed that pain had only one place to go. The room stayed quiet longer this time. The next idea did not arrive as a speech. Claire suggested moving the memorial music into the old boathouse, where the wooden floor carried vibration. Leah proposed placing lanterns along the shoreline to trace the original route from a safe distance. Rena agreed only if every activity remained within controlled harbor boundaries. Miriam refused to call it a replacement festival. No tickets, no tourist campaign, no pretending nothing happened. A voluntary memorial was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Not everyone approved. Several business owners left before the vote. Others remained angry that caution had arrived after they had already spent money. The town did not heal in one meeting. That afternoon, Wesley returned to the audiology clinic. Nathan fitted him with temporary hearing aids and adjusted the program for overlapping voices and radio noise. The first sound Wesley noticed was paper sliding across the desk. It seemed unnaturally sharp. "You may hate them for a while," Nathan said. "I already do." "Good. That means you're using them." 2 days later, Wesley took Bracken to the veterinary clinic. The German shepherd stopped at the sight of the metal examination table. His breathing quickened and his right ear flattened. Wesley nearly turned around. Instead, the veterinarian covered the table with a wooden board and folded blankets. Claire sat near the wall without calling Bracken or touching him. They waited. After 19 minutes, Bracken placed one paw on the covered surface, then another. Wesley understood the lesson before anyone said it. Progress did not require fear to disappear. It required another choice to remain possible. He visited Owen at the hospital that evening. The cracked brass lantern sat between them. "Can it still go to the lighthouse?" Owen asked. "Not by foot." Owen nodded. Wesley turned the damaged glass toward the light. "The patrol can carry it by hovercraft, controlled route. Rena and Leah approve it." Owen rested his good hand on the lantern. Then he pushed it toward Wesley. There was no apology large enough for what had happened, no forgiveness complete enough to erase it. Only an object passing from one man to another, and the first practical act of trust between them. 3 weeks after the accident, Whitewater Bay gathered along the harbor instead of walking onto the lake. Snow fell lightly through a pale blue evening. Lanterns stood on railings, window sills, wooden crates, and the steps of the old boathouse. The original route across the bay remained closed, its red warning stakes still visible beneath strips of white ribbon tied by volunteers. No one had hidden the barriers for the sake of beauty. That mattered to Wesley. The memorial was smaller than Lantern Crossing had ever been. Several storefronts remained dark. Some residents stayed home. Others came only long enough to place a lantern and leave without speaking. The town had not agreed on what the night meant. It had only agreed not to lie about what had happened. At the end of the pier, Owen stood with his injured arm free of its sling, but still held close to his body. Without the brass lantern in his hand, he looked uncertain where to place his fingers. Far out on the bay, a county hovercraft moved along a route Leah had approved that morning. Rena rode beside the operator, monitoring the crossing while the cracked lantern rested inside a padded case. Owen watched without moving. Wesley stood several feet away with Bracken at his side. "You could have gone with them," Owen said. "It wasn't my route to supervise." Owen glanced at him. A month earlier, the answer would have sounded like withdrawal. Now it sounded like trust. The hovercraft reached Black Pine Island as the first lamps were lit along the shore. Through binoculars, Wesley saw Rena carry the lantern up the lighthouse steps and place it against the railing. A small amber glow appeared across the darkening bay. Owen took off one glove and pressed his bare fingers against the cold pier post. "That's far enough," he said. Wesley understood he was not speaking about distance. Inside the boathouse, Claire and the musicians began playing. The old floor carried the cello's lower notes through the beams and into the harbor deck. Thin lines of light had been installed along the walls, rising and falling with the rhythm, so people could follow the music by sight as well as sound. Wesley adjusted his hearing aids. The higher strings were still too sharp in places. Voices blended when people moved behind him, but the cello came through with a fullness he had never noticed before. Bracken lay between Wesley and Claire's chair. The dog did not watch the doors. He did not flinch when a metal stand scraped briefly across the floor. After several minutes, his head lowered onto his paws, then his eyes closed. Wesley looked down. Bracken was asleep in the middle of a crowded room. The sight struck him harder than the music. For years, Wesley had measured safety by what never happened. No alarm missed, no crack overlooked, no person lost. Bracken seemed to understand something simpler. Safety could also be the moment a body finally decided it no longer had to remain prepared. When the music ended, Miriam asked Wesley to say a few words. He unfolded the speech he had written, looked at the first sentence, and put it back into his coat. "I used to believe my job was to bring people home," he said. The boathouse quieted. "After Aaron died, I began thinking home had to be a place where nothing failed. No bad judgment, no weak ice, no one needing help." He looked toward the harbor, where lanterns stretched along the shoreline. "That place does not exist." No one interrupted. "Home is where people tell the truth about danger, where they admit what they cannot do alone, where staying beside one another matters more than pretending everything is unchanged." Wesley did not ask the town to forgive him. He did not forgive the town on its behalf. He only thanked the people who had shown up. Later, Claire found him outside beneath the harbor lights. "Are you still planning to leave?" she asked. "No." The answer came without effort. "I'm proposing a new safety structure. 3 independent reviews, long-term sensors, visual and audible alarms, no event committee involved in technical approval." Claire smiled. "That sounds inconvenient." "It should." Bracken came through the open door and paused in the snow. He looked toward Wesley, then toward the volunteers removing lanterns farther down the harbor. Owen was among them, working one-handed beside Leah and Rena. In the past, Wesley would have called the dog back immediately. This time he waited. Bracken ran toward the others. The next morning, Wesley returned to the operations office and handed Leah the primary weather radio. He kept a second unit clipped inside his coat. Outside, the bay remained white and closed. The town beyond it was awake. Wesley locked the office, slipped his gloves into his pocket, and followed Bracken's tracks toward the harbor. He did not walk onto the ice. He walked toward the people waiting on the shore. Sometimes peace does not come from returning to the way life was before loss. It comes when we stop walking toward what can no longer hold us and begin noticing the people still waiting on the shore. May God give us the courage to release what is unsafe, the grace to accept help, and the wisdom to recognize that home can still exist in a changed form. If this story stayed with you,
Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories about courage, loyalty, and the quiet ways people find their way back to one another.